here's what our learning outcomes are for this afternoon. Hopefully by the end of this afternoon's session, we'll know a little bit more about how we can use AI tools to kind of support our students' conceptual understanding of chemistry and how we can help our students develop in the classroom. We'll also hopefully learn a little bit about the potential risks, about the limitations, about things that we have to consider when using AI, specifically when it's students using AI, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to kind of look as well about how we can develop that AI literacy and encourage its responsible use in the classroom. Okay, so so generative AI, here's different things that you might have heard about it. It's a shortcut that's going to make all your workload issues disappear, right? Or you might have heard that it's going to be a threat to your job or the learning. It's going to be a threat to that. Or you might have heard just as a tool that you can use to support you and your students within your teaching. I don't think it's a shortcut that's going to make your workload disappear. And sorry to burst anyone's bubble if you've turned up this afternoon thinking that I was going to give you the silver bullet that would make all your workload issues disappear. Is it a threat to your job or learning? I don't think it's a threat to your job. There's lots of things that we'll find that AI cannot do. AI is not very good at behaviour management. It doesn't have that physical presence in the classroom as a teacher. It doesn't have that situational awareness, to manage the classroom dynamics and the things that make us expert teachers. It's rubbish when it comes to empathy and mentorship. As educators, we build trust with the students in our classroom. We inspire them. We develop their curiosity. We give emotional support when it's required, and we make those human connections that technology can't. And we're chemistry. We're a practical subject, and whatever our students are going to learn from AI, it's not going to be that kind of practical, creative, specialised education that we provide as chemistry educators. So similar to things like art or music or physical education, learning chemistry relies a lot on that kind of human dexterity and manipulating practical equipment in the classroom. Okay. I've put a little asterisk there about a threat to learning. It potentially can be a threat to learning. I do think if it's not used correctly, that if we start to outsource our thinking to AI, then it potentially is going to harm learning. But is it a tool that you can use for support? Yes, I think it is. It's a tool that we can use for support. I'm seeing in the chat that I'm echoey. Is it a me problem or is it a people listening problem? The warning before we start here, when we come to use generative AI tools, there's things that we have to be wary of. We have to be wary of the law. There may be, for instance, the EU, we have GDPR restrictions that we have to be aware of when we are inputting anything into generative AI tools. We have to be aware of the policy of the school or the institution that we work in as well. So a lot of schools and institutions now will have AI use policies. So please, be looking at that and be thinking about your pupils. Be thinking about your students that you are working with. And what it's, we don't, often we don't have their permission to share anything. So when you're using an AI chat, it might be okay to use anonymized learner work, or fictional scenarios that you create that you might want a response to, or to talk about a class in general, but never upload to AI, anything that can identify a child, children's names, identifying information, photos, anything like that, any sort of personal data, email addresses, voice recordings as well. I'd be wary and double checking things like that as well. Okay, so do check your school's data protection policy or data protection laws within your country before you do that. And whatever AI tool you choose to use, review its privacy policy. And some tools are going to claim license over anything that you upload. So So be careful of that. And if you're ever in doubt, the rule I always work with this, if you're ever in doubt, just assume that anything you upload could become public or used to train the AI model, or used by the AI provider. I just always make that assumption. Okay. So what's the actually? This was from the teacher survey, the science teacher survey 2 years ago now. It was a 2024 survey that 44% of teachers had used AI, and workload had not changed from that. It'll have risen. I think the question was asked again in the most recent teacher survey, and I'm sure we'll find that now more teachers are using AI, but workload isn't really changed. So hence this kind of session today of how can we use AI efficiently to try to improve our workload. But as I mentioned previously, I'm not going to give you any silver bullets today. So for anyone to start, I know there'll be different levels of use, prior use of generative AI in here. So just to kind of give a kind of quick overview of what AI is, it basically generates output in response to prompts. We can use put prompts into a chat for anyone who's never used it before, and we will get a response based on that. Okay, it is different from, say, a Google search, because if we type something into a Google search, it'll search Google for web pages that are out there for things that have already been published. Whereas when we put a response into generative AI, then it's the generative part. It's creating new content from. It will be sourcing from all the data that it's been trained on and creating new content. Okay, so it's using huge, vast amounts of data. They can identify patterns and to generate new content based on probability of what is the chance. Almost it's like a very enhanced version. A very enhanced version of predictive text in your phone. When your phone has got that in there to predict what the next word you're going to use is, it's using very similar technology just to predict what is going to come next. So there's popular tools that you will have heard of. ChatGPT is the one that's probably still the most commonly used. I've got Copilot in bold there. It's the one. It's probably not the best. Everyone's got their own preferences of tools. Copilot's potentially not the best, but it's the one I use just because I have got an institutional account for it. So I'm not setting up my own account with my own data or anything like that. I'm provided with an institutional account, and I find that it does everything that I need it to do. But there's Gemini, there's Claude. I would encourage you to play about with these, but obviously that's if you're comfortable setting up an account with them as well, because often you'll have to set up an account, and that involves sharing your own data with the companies that put on these tools. Okay. So there's been a bit of work already done to look at the benefits of using generative AI, and this was ChatGPT study carried out by the EEF in the UK, the Education Endowment Foundation. And they carried out a little study to look at the use of ChatGPT in lesson preparation. And it's a really interesting study. You get these slides, so you'll get that hyperlink that takes you to the study. And it's interesting, it gives some very interesting data out there that yes, it did save on workload, but it's not that silver bullet. And quoting from the study, teachers using ChatGPT experience significantly lower lesson and resource preparation time than a comparison group of teachers who were asked not to use generative AI tools to plan their lessons. The lesson and resource planning time for ChatGPT teachers was 56.2 minutes per week, compared to 81.5 minutes per week for the comparison group, those that weren't using generative AI. So it is a reduction in workload, but it's not, it's not the silver bullet that's going to cure all your workload issues. What the study also found as well, though, was that the frequency of ChatGPT declined over the course of the trial. The teachers that were in the group to use ChatGPT, as they progressed through the trial, they were using it less and less. And the thought behind that is that maybe teachers were becoming a bit more familiar at what ChatGPT could do quickly, and what they were maybe just quicker just doing themselves without the use of ChatGPT, and we'll talk a little bit about that later as well. There was some things that I found worrying, and feel free to share in the chat whether you completely disagree with me, which is absolutely fine, or whether you also find this worrying. That there was a quote that said, using ChatGPT may also save more time for teachers who are less confident in planning and teaching physics, and in their science subject knowledge. And that's my big worry of AI, is that it can be used to replace thinking and replace expertise rather than complementing and being a tool to support expertise, about replacing expertise. And I found that sentence a bit worrying in it, to be honest with you, that it was saving time for those that didn't have the subject knowledge. Whereas my argument would be, as a teacher, if I didn't have the subject knowledge, I would be going away and developing that subject knowledge myself rather than relying on a generative AI tool to do that. Okay. But the applications it was used for in this study was to generate activity ideas for lessons. It was used to generate questions, for use in class, to adapt existing resources, to make worked examples, and to make exam questions, kind of mock exam questions, and to develop explanations that could be used in the class. And I've seen someone putting there in the chat, sorry, I get distracted with the chat. I'm easily distracted. Really needs expert critical eye. It's a starting point to check. Brilliant. You can read my mind. We can make checks for understanding, for anyone who's not used to that acronym, checks for understanding, to check common misunderstandings. Okay, and that is the link that to the website that the EEF trial used, was teachingwithchatgpt.org.uk. I will obviously give that disclaimer that other generative AI tools are available just for this study. It used ChatGPT. Okay. And that ties in with a brilliant article that was in Education and Chemistry. What I'm going to do, actually, let me just check. I've got some stuff here and another thing that I can cut and paste into the chat. No, I've lost it. There is a link. I'm sure one of the RSC people can put a link to these articles in the chat. But also good education and chemistry articles looking at how we can use ChatGPT effectively. Again, the article title was ChatGPT, but that doesn't mean you can't use Claude or Gemini or Copilot for enhancing planning and creating resources. And you can see the applications in the article very, very similar to what was getting reported in the EEF study. So, for instance, creating multiple choice questions, making glossaries, so that that students can refer to look at definitions of key terms, to prepare worked examples. Again, thanks, Georgia, to support wider reading and comprehension, and to build Excel formulas. And this it was great. It talks about, and I do it much less now that I'm not a teacher anymore. But when I was a teacher and I had a faculty, I was putting in Excel things for tracking and monitoring all the time, and I would have loved to have a generative AI tool to make my Excel formulas for me, to make that a lot simpler. Okay, so I'm going to just look at some of these just to give exemplars. Apologies, I was going to kind of stop sharing and go to and do it live modeling in Copilot, but I just thought it would be a bit clunky of me stopping sharing my PowerPoint to then share another screen. So I've taken just screenshots of pre-prepared things, and here's here's a specific prompt that I've put in to generate activity ideas. Now, what you'll notice about this prompt, and if you want to know about prompting, by the way, I know Kate mentioned right at the start of this about the generative AI self-led online course. I've had a kind of brief look at it, and it's absolutely fantastic, and you'll learn way much more about prompting in that if you do have the resources or the support from your school to undertake that CPD module. I would highly recommend it. Anyway, I've massaged Copilot's ego and told it it's not just a chemistry teacher, it's an expert chemistry teacher, and I've told it exactly what sorts of students that I am teaching, and I've told it what age they are. I've told them, I'm in Scotland, I'm based in Scotland, so I use our exam specification. I was very specific that they're preparing for Qualification Scotland National 5 Chemistry qualification, and the class are learning the following, and I have cut and pasted that straight from the course specification of the exam body, right? So I go into Qualification Scotland National 5 Chemistry course specification, I have cut and pasted that. A covalent bond forms when two positive nuclei are held together by their common attraction for a shared pair of electrons. Can you suggest 10 activities to check understanding of this? Okay, the reason I don't want 10 activities as a teacher, I'm thinking, that's my knowledge of, as someone put in the chat, generative AI needs an expert critical eye. It's a starting point to check. I'm thinking, if I get Copilot to generate 10 activities, there might be a few of them that are good. There might be some that that need that critical eye. And there's the eighth one. I deliberately cut and pasted the eighth one because I don't think it's very good, and that's where I think the expert knowledge of the teacher is required there, because I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who's not a chemistry teacher. And it says, give 3 pupil answers and ask the class to decide which is the best and why. So example A, answer A, a pupil says a covalent bond is when atoms share. Answer B, a covalent bond is when 2 atoms share electrons. And answer C is straight from the course specification. Okay, and then it's telling me that I can be asking the class which is best. Which is the best answer, and then I can go on to say what's missing from A or B, and which words make C more precise, and what it checks, a depth of understanding. I don't believe for a second it checks a depth of understanding, that question, but that's my expert chemistry knowledge. I know from teaching hundreds of chemistry pupils over my career that if they didn't understand, they would just pick the longest, most complicated sounding answer. And that's my expert knowledge of and experience of teaching. That as soon as students saw that, and if they didn't have an understanding of the answer C is quite long and sounds quite technical. So I would guess that is the answer. I know a large number of pupils that would guess that. So what it suggests does need your expert knowledge as a chemistry teacher about how you would tweak that. Okay, and I've even spoken to people who write exam questions for exam boards, and that's one of the things that they are careful about, because there's so much data shows that school students will pick the longest answer. If they are unsure, they will pick the longest answer, whether it's correct or not. Okay, so that is, that's just, you can get it to generate activities, but always, as you'll find me saying like a stuck record throughout this, you will need to check and double check. Okay. Generating questions, again, I've been very specific, expert chemistry teacher, and I've got the exact same part of the curriculum. Can you generate a multiple choice hinge question to check understanding before I move on to ask students to draw diagrams? And I've been very specific as well. There should be 4 answer options, and the wrong answers should be based on common misconceptions for this area. I'm telling it that I want it to think carefully about what it chooses for the distractors, because as someone has put in the chat, it's not great at writing distractors. Okay, so there is the hinge question. Hopefully you can see that okay on the screen. What holds 2 atoms together in a covalent bond, and it's telling me why the distractors are good, and why the correct answer matches the definition that's in the Qualifications Scotland course specification. Okay, so I would look at that, and I think that's not too bad actually. I probably could use that. That I think it's not bad an answer. Okay, adapting existing resources, it's pretty good at that, and I've just given some examples there that I've used in ChatGPT before. Rewrite the text below for students with a reading age of 10. When it comes to, if we want to develop literacy skills in our students, then we can have a range of literacy within our classroom, literacy skills within our classroom. Generative AI tools make it so much easier for us to kind of make differentiated texts, so that we can have different levels of text, but we can also maybe then ask it to generate questions, and it could be the exact same questions, right? So we can get it to ask the exact same questions, so we're helping pupils reach the same end point because they're still answering the same questions, but it might just be text that's a bit more accessible. Okay, or can you give me all, you might have, or you will have, you'll have pupils with English as an additional language in your class, or not. If English might not be your first language where you teach anyway, you'll have students that don't speak your language as the first language, so you can ask it to translate. Okay, and I've tried that before, but again, that's difficult because I've said they're into Portuguese, and I did that, but I have no way of knowing if what it's produced is is accurate or not, because I am a Portuguese. I am not a Portuguese speaker. My wife is a Portuguese speaker, being Portuguese, so I ran it past her. That's why I deliberately chose Portuguese, and I said to my wife, "Look, here's what I've translated," and she's like, "Yeah, that's Portuguese if you're Brazilian, but it's not European Portuguese." So there's all you have to, even if you're translating, you may still be needing a bit of to check. Don't just take, if you've taken a chunk of text and asked for it to be translated into another language for one of your students, then you may need to double check. And it may be the case if it's not. It might just be, rather than the chemistry language, it might just be the language itself that's not great, and your student can help you with that as well. So can you read through that and see if it actually makes sense? Okay. So worked examples, you can give it worked examples. Again, I'm going for my course specification. Sorry, this is all very focused on Scotland, but I went for the course specification for what I know, and when you use it, you'd be cutting and pasting in your own course specification. So I've got it there. The class are learning the following: for solutions, the mass of solute in grams, number of mole, blah, 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 can be calculated from the data provided. Can you generate a worked example of this calculation? So it's giving me a worked example there. It's giving me the mass of solute. It's giving me the volume solution. We need the concentration in moles per litre. Convert the volume to litres. Step 3, use moles equals mass divided by formula mass. And it's all very good, and it gives me the final answer. But I know the Scottish curriculum, and I know that in Scotland we don't use the term formula mass. Okay, I know that we use the term gram formula mass, which is often shortened to GFM. We call it in the Scottish curriculum, which is different from what they use in England. I don't know why, as neighbours, we have to use different terminology, but we have different terminology. So I have to use my critical eye on that again to if that was generated as a Word document, then I would have to go in and edit that so that I get it in the correct format, because I have students that would read that and realise that, or get confused because I have not written GFM, I've written formula mass. Okay, but it's quite good. It does give you those teaching notes, those common pitfalls, and those are common pitfalls. They are common pitfalls, like forgetting to change centimetres cubed into litres, or using the wrong formula, and then it's, as usual, most generative AI tools will then give you a little kind of suggestion of what you want to choose next. Okay, for creating explanations, I'm just going to run this as a video. I just did a screen recording, and it's an explanation all about reversible reactions. Okay, and I'll let this run just for a little bit. So I've asked it to generate an explanation. So it's given me this core analogy, and straight away I'm going to pause it, right? Because I'm seeing things like adding heat is like giving everyone energy drinks. I'm not quite sure if I'd use, I read through this and I think, yeah, there's some bits I would use and some bits I wouldn't use. Oh, I'm going to pause it again there. Simple student phrase: heat is treated like a chemical. That is often a misconception I'm trying to avoid. I don't want students thinking that heat is a reactant or a product in this. So I would not use that at all. Okay, and then it's going to give me how I can talk about changing pressure and giving the analogy for that. And it gives me some examples through that. So again, as I will sound like the stuck record throughout this, it's a very good starting point, right? It's a very good starting point, and I would always treat generative AI tool output as a decent first draft. And that's maybe how I would always see things, as a decent first draft. Okay, so I can move on. Getting check for understandings, it check for common. Check for understandings, it check for common misunderstandings. Okay, and again, I can ask it, I'm teaching equilibrium. What are the common misunderstandings, and what questions can I ask to check whether pupils have got those misunderstandings or not? Okay, so the reaction stops at equilibrium. Yeah, I recognise that. And students that I've taught, they think that at equilibrium, that is the reaction stops. They don't understand that the idea of dynamic equilibrium. The arrow shows what happens, not what changes. So we've got their ideas of misconceptions, but again, use these critically. You might read some and think, actually, my pupils don't have that misconception. if they don't have that misconception, don't use it, because you might find you're introducing that misconception if you tell them something that they haven't actually been thinking in the first place. Like pressure favours the side with larger molecules. I don't think I've ever taught pupils that have had that misconception, or if they have, then I haven't unearthed it. So we have to be careful with that as well. And catalyst shift equilibrium, we get that a lot as well. Okay. And the last one, yes, I do totally agree with that. Number 10, Le Chatelier is memorized, not explained. And I've been able to ask students, what's happening in this chemical reaction? What do you think would happen? And they'll happily recite Le Chatelier's principle back to me. And further probing shows that they have no understanding of what that actually means and can't actually apply it. Okay. Now notice I did this at the same time as I was preparing other slides for this talk, and Copilot has remembered, as it was part of the same chat, it's remembered that I liked a hinge question and I had asked for a hinge question earlier. So it's generated, it's given me a quick diagnostic hinge question. It has memorized, it's kept its knowledge from that chat, and it's given me a hinge question as well, just to check that understanding. Okay. Let me move on. Sorry, did I go on too many there? There we go. Right. Using AI as a tutor for students, you can do this, and there's a great article in Education and Chemistry by Kate Comiso, I think it is, who's also from Scotland, as it happens. It's a small world, and Kate has written a really good article about how we can use AI as a tutor for our students. I gave it a little shot, and there we go. You're an expert chemistry teacher. I'm a student learning higher chemistry, so this is our 16+ qualification in Scotland. I'm studying the following content, so I'm asking about equilibrium again. I want you to ask me questions to check my understanding of this. Please don't give me answers. If I answer something incorrectly, then please ask me questions to help me get the answer correct. And I've put that in. It's brilliant. I'll question you step by step and adjust based on your answers. No answers from me unless I need to guide you there. So question 1, it's showing me the Haber process there and asking me about the pressure. Okay, so I think I've deliberately given it a wrong answer. And it's told me I've applied the right idea about the number of moles, but it's wanting me to think more about it. So it's asking me, it's then questioning me more about how many moles of gas is there on each side of the thing. So I've entered that, I've put my answer in, it's asked me to check my logic, so I've put there, so it goes to the right because there are fewer moles of gas, and it's now telling me exactly, and then it goes on and gives me a harder question there. Okay, so students can use that themselves. Okay, now I think that comes with a huge disclaimer. Our students are teenagers. The temptation to just tell me the answer is going to be there. We really have to make sure our students are comfortable using AI and know how to use it critically. There's the screenshot. Sorry if I just go into there. There's a screenshot for Kate's article on that. But there was a more as Kate says in the article, it's like we teach them how to use Burette titration, I think is what she talks about in the article. So we have to teach them how to use AI effectively. And there's things that we can do, and we talk about one of the outcomes here about how can we help use AI critically. And there's research that Kate talks about in this article that users have been asked to engage with AI labelled as imperfect. If we tell our pupils that AI, and really emphasise that AI is imperfect and what it will give you is imperfect, then those students will outperform those that just trust the AI output. So we really have to emphasise to our students that we cannot trust the output from AI, that we have to be to treat it very critically. Okay, and when students are learning to question and to kind of double check and to challenge an AI tutor, they're building those exam skills, and developing that conceptual understanding. But it's also helping them to use AI responsibly, and we can argue it's now becoming part of our role is to help our students to use AI responsibly. Okay, but we have, we've got to avoid that frustration though that our students will just ask for the answer, and you know, and and tend to get them to use it at home, and that's, and Kate suggests that in the article, that I wouldn't be getting students to use it in the classroom because they have got something better than AI in the classroom, and that is their human teacher that can be there and give them that guidance and support. Okay. Fraser Scott published a good article, I think it was in the most recent Education in Chemistry, I think, that builds on, about that kind of uncritical use of AI. And it talks about how, research that has shown that if there are errors, if we use prompts and have errors in our prompts, and if pupils are using this and they unwittingly have an error in their prompt, then 50% of the time it was shown that the AI wasn't picking up on the error in the prompt and was just giving a wrong answer based on a wrong prompt. It wasn't picking up the errors in the prompt. So that is another thing to be careful of as well. Okay, and the research showed that generative AI supports that learning in chemistry when we teach our students to we explicitly teach our students how to interrogate rather than accept what AI is telling us. Okay. When it comes to practical work, Wendy, I was on the call today. Wendy's got a great article on practical work there. Don't rely on AI, and it can enhance classroom practicals, but it's no replacement. It's never going to be a replacement. And when we want our students to be able to modify procedures, to develop those hands-on skills, to develop those, to recognize, when something doesn't look quite right, that kind of tacit knowledge that our students get just from carrying out practical work, when they know when an endpoint is about to appear in a titration, all these little things that they get from carrying out practical work, that sensory judgment, all of these things that AI cannot replace, right? AI is great at pattern recognition, but it's rubbish at improvisation and that sensory awareness, okay, that we need to develop in our students, okay? And when it comes to writing risk assessments, just don't even think about it. All the advice from health and safety boards that we have in Scotland and in England, and I'm sure elsewhere, is AI can easily miss hazards or suggest some really unsuitable activities. So does writing risk assessments for any practical activities that we carry out is still a core skill of our role as the chemistry teacher. Okay. So things to be aware of, as I've said, we need to view any output from AI as a decent first draft. Don't accept any outputs uncritically. Don't get your pupils or students to accept any outputs uncritically. From a professionalism point of view, when it comes to kind of like a lot of planning learning activities, we become better teachers when we understand what we're doing in the classroom and why we're doing certain things in the classroom. And if we start to outsource, when it comes to planning, we can get it to generate questions, etc. And then we can look critically at those questions and maybe think about what sequence I would put them in. As someone put in the chat earlier, the distractors are rubbish in multiple choice questions a lot of the time, so we can change distractors and things. We can use it critically. However, if we just outsource all our planning and thinking to AI, then we're not going to develop as a teacher, and we're not going to understand why we're doing certain things in the classroom, and our students will just receive a poorer education because of that. Okay. Anyway, back to my slides. Things to be aware of. Be specific when you are putting things into the chat. Be very, very specific about who you want the AI to be, who your pupils are, and by that I don't mean personal information. It can just be sort of a mixed ability class of a certain age, and be specific about the exam specification you're using, etc. Accept that you will have to edit and tweak any output. Okay, very rarely has a generative AI tool give me something that I've thought, actually, yeah, I could use it, and I definitely wouldn't take it and use it without reading it, so even the ones that I've used, even any resource I've used without having to modify it, I've still kind of really interrogated it and thought deeply about, is this okay and why is it okay? Okay. We do still get hallucinations. I have asked I've asked it to generate simple multiple choice questions, and it has given me wrong answers. for simple calculations. Okay, and then when I tell it that the answer is wrong, it is very apologetic and polite, but it's still wrong. Okay, and if but so you really have to interrogate things. Okay, as has been mentioned a few times, check answers and distractors when writing multiple choice questions, because often they are very, very poor. And if you know anything about multiple choice questions, a lot of the time it's the quality of the distractors that makes a multiple choice question good. Okay. And watch out for that's what I find, even though I'm telling it Qualification Scotland and what course specification I'm using, I'm often getting terms that are wrong, definitions that are correct, but not what Qualification Scotland are looking for, or units that are wrong. You know, it might use MOL/L rather than MOL to the -1 for concentration, and spellings can be different. You know, even when I tell it to use UK English because I'm based in Scotland, then I sometimes find that it'll sometimes use American English as well. Okay. So for responsible use, I've deliberately put that picture there because it's so obviously AI generated, you know, and I've seen things like that used in classrooms as well. The balanced equation is correct. I don't think the graph's correct. The cyclobutane that the teacher's holding up is not correct. It's missing a couple of hydrogens where he's holding on to it. But it just looks like frivolous use of AI to me, and I think we have to be careful about, you know, what message are we sending to our pupils if we are just using AI frivolously. You know, are we dangling that temptation in front of pupils then that AI is just something just to be used for frivolous use? So I would also want to model professional use of AI. Okay. And it's difficult for our students. As I said, our students are teenagers. They are going to use it irresponsibly, you know, and that's just part of normal development of teenagers. It's not something we should be punishing them for or anything. You know, I just believe it's a normal part of development. But it means that, you know, our homework tasks pre-AI, probably pre-Google, not actually pre-AI, pre-Google. You know, our homework tasks, and we get the answers to homework questions. But those answers, we weren't really using homework answers to check whether the answers were correct. We were using those answers as a kind of proxy for the learning process. We're using them as a proxy for learning. Have my students learned how to carry out this calculation, or you know, or have they learned these definitions? You know, whereas now when we're getting output from homework, we don't know that anymore. You know, we can get the correct output, but all these days we don't really know whether there's been learning behind that or whether it's just been AI that has given those answers. So, you know, often I'd be recommending now, still, it doesn't stop us giving out homework, but double check, go over, just question some pupils in the class when they come back in, right? Question 4, explain to me how you got that answer to question 4 then, you know, and just double checking that so that you know, our students have still got that kind of bit of pressure just to do that learning as well. Okay, so talk to your pupils about responsible use, model it. You know, if you are going to use it to generate questions for your pupils, generate them live in front of your pupils. Right, I'm going to generate 10 questions now to check your understanding of this. Generate them and show them, right, do questions 1, 4, 5, 8, and 10, and then explain why the others I cannot use, and this is why they're not good, and why I'm not going to trust the AI output in these, and model that responsible use of generative AI. Okay. Now, what to be careful of is, you know, cognitive offloading, because that is the worry that if students are going home, that, you know, a simplistic understanding that learning, you know, learning requires thinking, and thinking is hard. You know, we kind of automate things in our brains because we've kind of evolved to try to avoid thinking, because thinking is hard and uses up a lot of calories, and so we've evolved to try not to think. So, you know, so our students or us as teachers, we could get generative AI to do the thinking for us, but then that's going to lead to learning being hard. Okay, and that's where we have to be careful. The AI has been used as a tool to support expertise and to support learning, but not to replace the thinking that causes the learning to happen. Okay, so often being very careful about that. Okay. I'm not going to get you to do this task because, but I'm going to let you kind of look at it and read it because I'd like you to do this at some point if just afterwards. Just this might be something you've already done many times, but you may be someone who's like, yeah, I've generated stuff using generative AI, but I've never looked at it critically. Yeah, take that time to look at something for your own specification and use it critically, and answer those questions to yourself. You know, how would this what I've generated need adapted? Could I made it better on my own? You know, and would it have saved me time, or have I spent more time adapting it than I would, than I would have if I just made it on my own to start with? Okay, so considerations when it comes to using generative AI is, do you really need to use it? Okay, do you really need to use it? And do your pupils really need to use it? You know, often as teachers, we're under pressure to use technology. You know, it's in Scotland, it's in our General Teaching Council for Scotland teacher standards about effective use of technology. There's that kind of pressure to use technology, but I'm always a believer that technology should be used appropriately and at the right time. So thinking about when you need to use technology and only using it at the right time. Okay. I haven't really touched on the environmental impact of generative AI. If you're unaware of its environmental impact, just Google it and you'll see what there is a huge environmental impact of generative AI, whether that's electricity use, water use, or mining of rare metals, and often that can involve exploitation for mining those rare metals. So there is a lot of ethical environmental issues, which is something you want to be aware of before you use it wholeheartedly. I've mentioned before right at the start about safeguarding and privacy, that if, even with your own use, you will be setting up an account often to use it. If you want to get access to better models, and you have to pay. So there's an equity issue there as well, that especially if you're using it with pupils as well, can some pupils do they live in households so they can afford to pay for better versions of the models, and you've got some students who can't or may not have access to any version of the model at all. Okay. As I've mentioned a few times, it's great at pattern recognition. It doesn't know your curriculum or your pupils or your students in front of you as well as you do. You are the human. You are the number one resource in your classroom. I always believe the teacher is the most important resource in the classroom, and that does not change. Okay, you will be the boss of AI. AI will not be the boss of you. I would always be telling you. Okay, I've asked it sometimes just to plan whole lessons. And I've given examples earlier on about planning little bits of lessons. If you ask it to plan a whole lesson, it tends to be pretty rubbish. I even got my student teachers to plan a whole lesson using just to generate a whole lesson and made them reflect on it. And even my student teachers being novices, right at the start of their teaching career, one of their exact words were, if I taught this lesson when you were coming to observe me, you would fail me, because it was so put in. It wasn't right for the Scottish curriculum or anything like that. So it's good for planning little bits of lessons, but it's not great for planning whole lessons. And I think that EEF study I talked about right at the start, I think that was the finding of that study as well. And it's just, I'll hammer this home, it's never going to be a replacement for expertise. It's your expertise that I think is going to become more important, because AI tools are going to become more and more prevalent, and your expertise as an educator is going to become more and more important for evaluating that output and being able to use that output appropriately. Okay, and then that time, the time to create a resource from scratch versus the time to adapt the AI output, that is a decision that you have to make as an educator. And I think I've had a look at Wendy Winnard's AI online tool, and I think she talks about AI tax, which I think was a brilliant phrase. That I think, what is the AI tax on this? And is the use of AI worthwhile, right? And do your pupils just deserve better? That's what I'm saying. Sometimes it generates rubbish, and it can generate rubbish pictures like the one I showed there. It's just that would enhance nothing in any presentation that I was using with students. So do my students deserve better than that? Okay. And the final thing to be aware of, if you're not aware of Victoria Headland, if you use LinkedIn, I would look at what Victoria Headland is posting on LinkedIn, because there has been, she's been looking at a lot of bias in AI output as well. It's really interesting work, especially in, she's looked a lot at bias between asking AI tools for outputs aimed at boys and AI outputs aimed at girls as well. And she published recently in an ASE journal, an SSR, a good article about that as well. So it's really worth engaging with Victoria Headland's work on this. I would highly recommend you to look at it. She had a really good one. I think it was just today in LinkedIn, where she'd asked Chat, I don't know if it's ChatGPT, she'd asked a generative AI tool to explain how a light bulb works to an American and a Russian. And the differences in the two explanations were not just they were just bizarre, to be honest with you. I'd encourage you to go and look at that. Okay, but I decided to have a little play with that myself, and I've told Copilot that it's an expert chemistry teacher for Mixed Ability X4 class, and a boy in the class is struggling to understand electrolysis. Can you provide a good explanation? And it's just very, very subtle, and I wonder myself, feel free to share in the chat whether you think I'm just reading too much into this as well. But here's a clear, student-friendly idea, and it gives a good explanation. And, it's given a way that I can explain to this boy who's struggling with electrolysis to understand electrolysis, and it's got oil rig in there and a little helpful analogy, and then some key takeaways for the student. But then I asked that there's a girl in the class who's also struggling. Can you give an explanation for the girl? And it was just the very first sentence that I just thought that here's a slightly different explanation aimed at a learner who may need more structure, clearer steps, and reassurance. It was almost like just this kind of just assumption that the girl might just be lacking confidence, and the girl just might need a bit of a confidence. Or maybe I just read too much into it. I think there's just subtle differences, and I just wish AI had responded to me saying just the exact same as what I told you above for the boy. Actually, is what I would hope that AI would have responded to that. But the fact that it didn't respond, and Victoria's work has shown that, and then Miss Batch just put in the chat there studies that show AI can show prejudice. It absolutely shows prejudice, because it's and it's trained in a lot of it's trained in most of what is on the World Wide Web and what is produced, which is mostly from the Western world, so it's got that prejudice in there. So be aware of that. Okay. So hopefully, as we get to the end of the session, and I hand you back to Kate, that we've learned a little bit about how AI can be used to support that conceptual understanding and help our students solve problems in lessons. Hopefully, I've given you a bit of knowledge about the kind of risks and the limitations and what you have to think about ethically when using AI with students, and hopefully as well that you've learned a bit about developing AI literacy with your students. I'm not employed by the RST at all in any way at all, so I'm not saying this for that reason. But I hope this is definitely just a taster for that online self-led course. As I said, I haven't gone through the online course, but I have had a look at the materials, and it looks absolutely fantastic. If you really want to kind of develop your knowledge and your skills in the use of generative AI in the chemistry classroom, I would highly recommend that you have a look at that. But I hope I've managed to develop some of that knowledge in you today. I did see some things going up in the chat about using it to make simulations. I've talked about that previously, and it was something that was on my to-do list to learn how to maybe a little bit about coding and generating codes to make simulations. But that, I think it was a prime example of where I just didn't have the knowledge of the coding. I was generating coding and I was pasting it in, and there was little issues, and I just didn't have the knowledge to understand where AI was making the mistakes and what I needed to do. So again, I think, yes, it has got potential for generating simulations, but I think someone else put in the chat there that PhET has got some great simulations already. So yeah, you may find that it would just add to your workload, and you're better off with what is already out there simulation wise. Okay. And that's it. Thanks for listening. I mean, any questions put in the chat? I know Kate's got other things she needs to share with you, but I know there's been questions in the chat, and it's great to see that people have been responding and helping out each other in the chat. And I apologise that I am really rubbish at keeping an eye on a chat while talking at the same time. But thank you for giving up an hour of your time for this, and I really hope that you got something to take away from it that you can use in your classroom.